What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors comes face to face with a talk show host who's clearly crossed the line? You won't believe what unfolds when Johnny Depp sits down with Seth Meyers for what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance, only to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two clash in ways nobody saw coming. Last night's episode of Late Night with Seth Meyers started like any other. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement as Johnny Depp made his entrance, that familiar swagger intact despite everything he'd been through in recent years. The cameras rolled, the applause died down, and what should have been a straightforward chat about his latest film quickly transformed into something much darker. From the moment Depp settled into the guest chair, something felt off. Meyers had that particular glint in his eye, the one that seasoned talk show watchers know means trouble. Instead of the usual warm welcome, there was a coldness in his demeanor that immediately put the audience on edge. Depp, ever the professional, maintained his composure, but you could see the subtle shift in his posture as he sensed what was coming. "Johnny, thanks for being here," Meyers began, his voice carrying an undertone that suggested this wasn't going to be the friendly chat everyone expected. "I have to say, it's been quite a journey watching your career over the past few years." The word journey hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Depp's eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the veiled reference to his highly publicized legal battles. "It's been educational," he replied carefully, his voice maintaining that distinctive cadence fans know so well. But Meyers wasn't content to let sleeping dogs lie. "Educational is certainly one way to put it," he said with a smirk that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I mean, when you think about the impact of certain revelations on your career, on your fans, on the industry as a whole." The tension in the room was palpable. Depp's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in. "Seth, I think we both know that the truth has a way of coming out eventually. And thankfully, it did." "The truth," Meyers repeated, leaning forward with that aggressive interviewer posture that screams confrontation. "That's interesting, because I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out what that actually means in your case." The audience began to murmur. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they'd come to expect from late-night television. This was beginning to feel like an interrogation, and Depp was clearly not prepared for this level of hostility. "I'm not sure what you're getting at," Depp said, his voice still controlled but with an edge creeping in. "The courts made their decision. The jury made their decision. I'm here to talk about my work, not to relitigate the past." Meyers laughed. Not the kind of laugh that puts guests at ease, but the kind that suggests he's enjoying watching someone squirm. "Oh, come on, Johnny. You can't honestly expect to come on television and pretend that elephant isn't in the room. I mean, your fans might buy that, but the rest of us—" "The rest of you? What?" Depp interrupted, his famous composure finally beginning to crack. The audience could sense the shift. This was no longer two celebrities having a chat. This was personal. "The rest of us remember what we heard, what we saw, what came out in those depositions," Meyers pressed, clearly relishing the moment, pushing buttons any decent host would know to avoid. "And I think a lot of people are wondering how someone comes back from that kind of exposure." The word exposure was delivered with such venom that even the studio crew looked uncomfortable. Depp's hands, which had been resting casually on the chair's armrests, now gripped them tightly. "You know what, Seth? I came here tonight thinking we were going to have a conversation about my film, about my craft, about the things that actually matter to people who support my work." "But isn't this part of your work now?" Meyers pressed, clearly sensing blood in the water. "Isn't rehabilitation part of the job description these days? I mean, when you're trying to convince people that you're not the person that came across in those recordings—" "Stop!" Depp's voice cut through the studio like a blade. The single word carried such authority that even Meyers paused for a moment. "You're crossing a line here, and you know it." But Meyers wasn't backing down. If anything, Depp's reaction seemed to embolden him. "Am I? Because I think my audience deserves to know who they're cheering for. I think they deserve to understand what kind of person they're supporting when they buy a ticket to your movies." The audience was now completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Talk show confrontations were one thing, but this felt different. This felt cruel, and Depp, despite years of media training and public appearances, was clearly reaching his breaking point. "Your audience," Depp said slowly, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that anyone who's ever been in a real confrontation recognizes immediately, "deserves better than a host who ambushes his guests with tabloid trash disguised as journalism." The insult landed hard. Meyers' face flushed. For a moment, the power dynamic shifted. Now it was the host who looked uncomfortable. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Tabloid trash, Johnny. This isn't tabloid trash. This is your life. These are your words. These are your actions. And pretending they don't exist doesn't make them go away. And pretending to be a journalist doesn't make you one." Depp shot back, his voice rising for the first time since sitting down. The audience gasped audibly. This was no longer a talk show segment. This was a full-blown confrontation playing out in real time. Meyers leaned back in his chair, that smug expression never leaving his face. "You know what? You're right. I'm not a journalist. I'm a comedian. And sometimes comedy means calling out hypocrisy when we see it. Sometimes it means not letting people hide behind their publicists and their lawyers and their carefully crafted comebacks. Hide." Depp's voice cracked slightly, revealing just how deeply this attack was affecting him. "Do you have any idea what it's like to have your entire life dissected in public? To have every mistake, every moment of weakness, every private conversation dragged through the mud for the entertainment of people like you?" The raw emotion in his voice was unmistakable now. This wasn't the controlled, charismatic Johnny Depp audiences were used to seeing. This was a man who'd been pushed too far, and the cracks were beginning to show. But rather than showing even a hint of compassion, Meyers pressed forward relentlessly. "Well, maybe that's what happens when you make certain choices. Maybe that's the price of fame. Or maybe it's just the price of—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air like poison. The audience was visibly uncomfortable, some shifting in their seats, while others looked around as if hoping someone would intervene. Depp stared at Meyers for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with controlled breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout could have managed. "You have no idea what you're talking about, no idea what you're doing, and no idea what's about to happen." The threat was unmistakable. Suddenly, the studio felt charged with an energy that nobody had expected when the cameras started rolling. This was no longer entertainment. This was something much more dangerous, and everyone in the room could feel it. But instead of recognizing the warning signs, of pulling back from the brink, Seth Meyers just smiled that cold, calculating smile, and prepared to deliver what would become the point of no return. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. The studio audience held their collective breath, sensing they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years. Meyers adjusted his tie with deliberate slowness, savoring the moment like a predator toying with wounded prey. "You know what, Johnny?" Meyers said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I think what really bothers people isn't even the legal stuff. It's the victim complex, the way you've positioned yourself as this wronged artist, when really, a lot of us are just wondering what kind of man does those things to someone they claim to love." The words hit like a physical blow. Depp's entire body went rigid, his knuckles white as he gripped the chair arms. The audience gasped collectively, and even some of the crew members visibly recoiled. This had crossed every line of decency that exists in professional television. You want to know what kind of man? Depp's voice was barely controlled now, each word carefully measured but loaded with fury. The kind who spent 6 years being systematically destroyed by lies. The kind who had his children read horrible things about their father that weren't true. The kind who lost everything because people like you decided guilt by accusation was good enough. But Meyers wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his expression one of mock concern. "Oh, but Johnny, we all heard those recordings. We all saw the evidence. And I think what really gets to people is this idea that you can just move on, that you can just show up here and expect us to pretend like none of that happened. Those recordings were taken out of context, edited, manipulated," Depp shot back, his composure finally beginning to crack completely. "And you know what? Even if they weren't, even if every word was exactly as presented, what gives you the right to sit there and judge me? What gives you the right to ambush someone on your show?" The host's smile widened. "The right, Johnny? I think the public has a right to know who they're celebrating. I think they have a right to understand what kind of person they're putting their money behind. And honestly, I think they have a right to hear from someone who's actually been through what you put them through." The implication was clear, and it was the final straw. Depp shot to his feet so quickly that his chair rolled backward, hitting the backdrop with a loud thud. "You son of a—" he snarled, his famous composure completely shattered. "You have no idea what you're talking about. No idea what really happened. And you sure as hell have no right to sit there and lecture me about anything." The audience was completely silent now, shocked by the raw emotion and anger radiating from the normally controlled actor. Some were filming with their phones, others simply stared in disbelief. This was television history in the making, but not the kind anyone had hoped for. Meyers remained seated, clearly enjoying every second of Depp's breakdown. "I think I struck a nerve," he said with that same cruel smile. "And you know what? I think that tells us everything we need to know about how much you've really changed. One little question about accountability, and you're—" "Ready to what?" Depp interrupted, taking a step closer to the host's desk. "Ready to defend myself against some nobody comedian who thinks he can make a career out of kicking people when they're down? Ready to call out a pathetic excuse for a host who can't get ratings without ambushing his guests?" The insult hit home. Meyers' face darkened, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely angry rather than smugly satisfied. "Nobody comedian, Johnny? I've been doing this for over a decade. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel Prize winners, actual heroes. And you know what they all have in common? They can handle tough questions without having a meltdown on live television." "Tough questions?" Depp laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call this? Tough questions? This isn't journalism, Seth. This is character assassination. This is you trying to get viral clips by destroying someone who came here in good faith." The mention of viral clips seemed to strike another nerve with Meyers. "Good faith? You came here to promote a movie and rehabilitate your image. Don't pretend this was some altruistic gesture. You need this show more than this show needs you." Depp's voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. "I've been making movies since before you were even on television. I've brought joy to millions of people around the world. And you think I need your pathetic little show to validate my career?" Meyers stood up now, matching Depp's aggressive posture. "Your career, Johnny? Let's be honest about what your career is now. You're doing independent films that nobody sees, desperately trying to claw your way back to relevance. And the only reason you're here is because no respectable host would touch you with a 10-foot pole." The cruelty of the statement was breathtaking. Even the camera operators looked uncomfortable, and several audience members could be seen shaking their heads in disapproval. But Depp didn't crumble under the attack. Instead, something shifted in his expression. The hurt and anger crystallizing into something colder and more dangerous. "You know what the difference is between us, Seth?" Depp's voice had dropped to that deadly quiet tone again. "I've actually created something. I've brought characters to life, told stories that matter, made people laugh and cry and dream. What have you done? You make jokes about other people's pain. You tear down instead of building up. You're a parasite feeding off the misery of others. A parasite? Myers laughed, but there was no humor in it. Johnny, I'm giving you a platform. I'm giving you a chance to address your fans, to explain yourself, to show people who you really are. And this is how you respond. This is who you really are. This is who I am when I'm being attacked by a coward who hides behind a desk and pretends he's doing public service. Depp shot back. This is who I am when someone tries to use my pain for their entertainment. This is who I am when I'm dealing with someone who has no honor, no integrity, and no business calling himself a professional. The studio was now charged with an energy that felt dangerous. The confrontation had moved far beyond a simple disagreement between host and guest. This was personal warfare playing out in front of a live audience, and everyone could sense that something was about to explode. Myers circled around his desk, closing the distance between himself and Depp. Honor. Integrity. Johnny, you're lecturing me about integrity after everything that came out in those trials? After what people heard in your own voice? You want to talk about someone who has no business calling himself a professional? At least, I'm not a bottom feeder who makes his living off other people's misery. Depp snarled, his hands clenched into fists. At least I don't hide behind a fake smile and pretend to be someone's friend before I stab them in the back. Friend? Myers laughed harshly. Johnny, we're not friends. We've never been friends. You're here because your publicist begged us to book you, and I'm here because it's my job to ask the questions that matter. And if you can't handle that, maybe you should have stayed home. The contempt in his voice was unmistakable, and it was clear that both men had passed the point of no return. The audience watched in horrified fascination as two grown men tore each other apart on live television, each determined to land the most devastating blow. Questions that matter? Depp's voice was shaking with rage now. You haven't asked a single question that matters. You've just been trying to humiliate me for your own sick entertainment. And you know what? I've had enough. He turned toward the studio exit, but Myers wasn't finished. Oh, you're running away. How predictable. I guess this is what we should expect from someone who can't handle the consequences of their own actions. Depp stopped dead in his tracks, his entire body trembling with fury. When he turned back to face Myers, there was something in his expression that made everyone in the room take a step back. This was no longer just an angry celebrity having a bad interview. This was a man who had been pushed beyond his breaking point. You want to know what kind of man I am? Depp's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the silent studio like thunder. I'm the kind of man who's been through hell and came out the other side. I'm the kind of man who's been torn apart by people like you and still managed to keep going. And I'm the kind of man who's done playing your sick little games. He walked back toward Myers's desk with deliberate, measured steps, each footfall echoing in the dead silence. The host, for the first time since the interview began, looked genuinely uncertain. The smug confidence that had carried him through the entire ambush was beginning to crack. You think you know me because you read some headlines? Because you watched some edited clips? Because you heard some out-of-context recordings? Depp's voice was gaining power now, not from anger, but from something deeper. A man finally standing up for himself after years of being knocked down. You don't know anything about me. You don't know about the nights I couldn't sleep, wondering if my children would ever look at me the same way again. You don't know about the friends who abandoned me, the projects that disappeared, the complete destruction of everything I'd built over decades. The audience was transfixed. This wasn't the breakdown they'd expected. This was something far more powerful, a man reclaiming his dignity in real time. But you know what you really don't know? Depp continued, now standing directly in front of Myers' desk. You don't know what it feels like to have the truth on your side. You don't know what it feels like to survive something like that and come out stronger. And you certainly don't know what it feels like to have millions of people around the world who see through exactly the kind of pathetic hit job you just tried to pull. Meyers opened his mouth to respond, but Depp held up a hand, silencing him completely. No, you've had your turn. You've said your piece. You've shown everyone exactly who you are. Now, it's my turn. The actor turned to face the camera directly, ignoring Meyers completely. To everyone watching at home, you just witnessed something that happens far too often in this industry. You saw someone in a position of power use that power to try to destroy someone who came here in good faith. You saw what passes for journalism these days. Character assassination disguised as entertainment. His voice was steady now, controlled, but filled with a quiet authority that commanded attention. But you also saw something else. You saw that I'm not going anywhere. You saw that I won't be bullied. I won't be silenced. And I won't let small-minded people like this define who I am or what my life means. Behind him, Meyers looked like he was trying to regain control of his own show. But it was too late. The moment had shifted completely. This was no longer his stage. It belonged to Depp. Now, Seth, you wanted to know what kind of man I am. I'm the kind of man who's been through the worst that life can throw at someone, and still believes in art, in storytelling, in the power of creativity to heal and inspire. I'm the kind of man who's learned that real strength isn't about never falling down. It's about how you get back up. He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering his final blow. And I'm the kind of man who recognizes a failed comedian hiding behind cruelty when I see one. You're not edgy, Seth. You're not brave. You're not even good at this. You're just another bottom feeder who mistakes meanness for wit and thinks that tearing people down makes you important. The studio was completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to be holding their breath. Meyers' face had gone through several color changes, settling on an unhealthy shade of red that made him look like he was about to have a stroke. You know what the saddest part is? Depp continued, his voice now carrying a note of genuine pity. This was supposed to be about art, about a film I'm proud of, about the craft that's been my life's work. Instead, you turned it into this pathetic display of whatever insecurities drive you to attack people who can't fight back in the way you deserve. He began removing his microphone, the simple action somehow carrying more weight than any grand gesture could have. But here's the thing about bullies, Seth. They only have power when they're victims. Let them, and I'm done letting people like you have power over my life. The microphone hit the desk with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the studio like a gunshot. Meyers finally found his voice, stammering something about this being his show, about having the right to ask tough questions, about Depp being unprofessional. But Depp was already walking away, and his parting words cut through Meyers' protests like a blade through paper. The only thing unprofessional here is you. The only thing disgraceful is what you just did to someone who came here as your guest. And the only thing people will remember about this interview is how you showed your true colors. He paused at the edge of the set, turning back one final time. Oh, and Seth, you might want to work on your interview skills, because after tonight, I have a feeling you're going to need all the help you can get. With that, Johnny Depp walked off the set of Late Night with Seth Meyers, leaving behind a stunned studio audience, a humiliated host, and what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. The cameras kept rolling as Meyers stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, clearly struggling to process what had just happened. The audience began to murmur, then to talk more loudly, and finally to applaud, not for the host, but for the man who had just walked away with his dignity intact. In the control room, producers were scrambling to figure out how to handle the situation. The show would have to go to commercial, but the damage was already done. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation would be spreading across social media, and the narrative would be clear. Seth Meyers had tried to destroy Johnny Depp and had ended up destroying himself instead. The audience continued to buzz with conversation, as the reality of what they'd witnessed began to sink in. They had come expecting entertainment and had instead witnessed something far more significant. The moment when a man who had been knocked down too many times finally decided to stand up and fight back.